Hello everyone. I think it's time to start today's webinar. We all know that the title of today's webinar is why health star rating is not suitable for India. So today's discussion will be moderated by George Cherian. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. George. George is currently a director in CUTS International, and he is a member of FSSI, also a special invitee member. Earlier, George was a full-place member of FSSCI Advisory Central Advisory Committee from 2014 to 2019, and George is very much part of all the discussions which are happening in on FoPL from the beginning, from January 2021. George is extensively writing on this topic, and we keep reading his writings in the newspapers. So this is the brief introduction of George. And George, over to you for moderation of today's discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, Madhusudan. I join with Madhusudan in once again welcoming you all to this webinar, which is titled Why Health Star Rating is Not Suitable for India. This is the second webinar in the same title or the series that we are organizing. In addition to a number of webinars on FoPL, we have more than 120 people registered for this webinar. Many of them will be joining on this Zoom platform, but at the same time, we have shared the YouTube link as well. So many of them will be directly watching the webinar on the YouTube link as well. For this webinar, as the international expert to talk on the topic and especially about the HSR, we have Dr. Lindsay Tiley Smith from North Carolina University, US, who had joined with us. So I will introduce Dr. Lindsay in detail later. And also we have three discussants from India who is actively involved in this process, who will be taking part in this webinar. Advocate Saroja Sundaram, who is the Executive Director of Consumer Actions, Citizen Consumer and Civic Action Group, CAG, based in Chennai. And we also have the COO of Consumer Voice based in Delhi. And also we have Amit Khurana, who is the Director of Sustainable Food Systems at Center for Science and Environment based in Delhi. All the three of them are actively involved in the FoPL process. In addition to that, I'm also happy to introduce and welcome Antonio Picasso, and also another colleague, Carola. All of them are involved in the anti-Nutri-Score campaign in Europe. Especially in Europe, the European Commission had decided to come with a mandatory FoPL by the last quarter of 2022. So they are joining from Italy. Once the discussion about the initial discussion about HSR is concluded, they also will be sharing briefly about their campaign. So a brief background, as I mentioned, we have organized a series of workshops on FoPL, but so most of you are familiar with the discussion which is going on in the country. Now that is the hot topic. Like Antonio was mentioning, it is the front page news in India, the discussion about the FoPL and the burning issue. So, however, a brief background to move on. As all of you know, since we are looking this from the consumer perspective, all of you know that right to choose and right to information are fundamental consumer right. So the front of the pack nutrition labeling is a cost-effective messaging strategy to help consumers to make informed and healthier food choices by helping consumers to correctly, quickly, and easily identify products that contain unhealthy ingredients such as sugar, salt, and fat. So this debate or the process to choose a FoPL in India is almost 9 years old, responding to a Delhi High Court verdict asking the food regulator to come with guidelines to regulate the junk food, in response to a public interest litigation which was filed by a non-profit called Uday Foundation in 2020. In 2013 September, this Delhi High Court had asked the food regulator to come out with some guidelines, and they have submitted their response in March 2024. So there, this process in India had started about a front of the pack labeling to identify the junk food. Later, the terminology was changed into food with high fat, sugar, and salt. After a few years, in 2008, the food regulator came out with a draft food safety and standards labeling and display regulation, which was debated. Even cuts, we organized a national consultation involving the industry and the consumers way back in August 2018. Then a draft notification of the food safety and standards labeling and display regulation was notified by the food regulator in May 2019. Even after that, the process was getting delayed. Then in January 2021, the context is the increasing NCDs in India and also the linkage of NCDs with the pandemic, especially with the COVID-19. In India now, it is almost 62 to 65% of the total death is accounted due to non-communicable diseases. Out of that, almost 49% is preventable premature death. And also that there is a correlation of NCDs, as all of us know, with the COVID-19. People with NCDs and pre-existing comorbidities were more vulnerable during the pandemic. So the food regulator also had decided to fast track this process of finalizing the FoPL. The reason is food with high fat, sugar, and salt is one of the main reasons for the increasing NCDs in India. So this process started in January, and 7 rounds of consultations were there, where myself, along with all the 3 colleagues who are present here, we were participating in this stakeholder consultation to reach at the consensus. I'm not going into the details of that. In June 2021, one of the stakeholder meeting, it was decided to engage a center of excellence or an institution like a business school to do this study. And that study was presented in a meeting in February 15. So it was very shocking to us, because we were advocating for a very simple and illustrative warning label in India, taking into consideration the various situation in the country, the literacy level, the language barriers, and things like that. But to our surprise, in the 15 February meeting, concluding the study of this business school, suddenly the food regulator had suggested to go with a health star rating. And not only that, given a period of almost 5 years for voluntary implementation. It does not mean in anything in India, because voluntary means nobody will be doing anything. And and we were strongly opposing this decision from February, though even prior to that we were knowing about the intentions of the food regulator. So this intensified advocacy campaign started in February. As all of you know, this why we are opposing the health star rating. It is only implemented in 2 countries, that is Australia and New Zealand, as all of us know. in Australia. It was introduced in 2014. And on conclusion of 5 years, several studies are there. One of the study by the Deakin University, it says that the design and implementation of the current health star rating system is misleading consumers about the healthiness of many food by inadvertently providing a health halo for almost 75% of the ultra processed food and 50% of the discretionary food displaying the symbol. HSR is unlikely to discourage consumers from buying the products high in sugar, salt, and saturated fat. That is, I was just reading from one of the study which came out on the 5-year review. Does the Australian Health Star rating system perform after 5 years? It is titled like that. From the New Zealand, we also were thinking Professor Grant Schofield will be able to join with us, but he could not join. He is the Chief Health and Nutrition Advisor at the Ministry of Education of New Zealand. He says the health star rating is already dead in the water. The algorithm is flawed in the combination of fat, salt, and sugar. The food industry brought this to us. We were suckered in. Perversely, very high sugar foods can get 4+ health stars. This is the feedback we are getting from New Zealand. The reason is, as all of us know, the star is decided based on the overall nutrition value of the product. So even product with unhealthy ingredients can get high score by adding healthy ingredients like fiber, vitamins, protein, vegetable matter, etc. So really in identifying the product with unhealthy ingredients, it is not going to help the consumers. So this is the context in which, but though we all had expressed our opposition to this decision, since our regulator is going ahead with the decision to implement the health star rating in India, that is the reason, that is the context in which we are organizing this webinar. And to speak, the experience from various countries, like I have mentioned, we have Lindsay, who is, attending as the national expert, because we quote a lot of examples from North Carolina University. Dr. Lindsay is assistant professor at the Department of Nutrition at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in USA. Dr. Lindsay holds degree from Northwestern University, LA University, and the University of North Carolina. She is trained as a nutrition epidemiologist and has a decade of experience working in 10 countries to design and evaluate food policies to promote healthier diets, with a strong focus on front of the pack labeling effort. Dr. Lindsay has published over 115 articles in top academic journals, and her work on front of the pack labeling has been featured in New York Times, The Guardian, and other international media outlets. We are very privileged to get Dr. Lindsay today in our webinar to make the main presentation. So on behalf of all of you and on behalf of CUTS, I welcome Dr. Lindsay to this meeting. And also, as I mentioned, we have 3 discussants: Advocate Saroja Sundaram, who is the Executive Director of Citizen Consumer
University of
Action
North
Group.
Carolina से और FoPL पे काम किया है 150.
And we have Ashim Sanyal, the Chief Operating Officer of Consumer Voice, and also we have Amit Khurana, who is the Director at the Center for Science and Environment. All the 3 of them are part of the stakeholder group of FSSAI on FoPL. Ashim Sanyal is also a member of the Central Advisory Committee of FSSAI. Saroja is also the representative from India and South Asia in the Council of Consumers International, which is the global voice of consumers headquartered in London. So I welcome all the speakers to this webinar. And now I invite Dr. Lindsay to make her presentation. Over to you, Dr. Lindsay.
Wonderful. Are you seeing my slides?
Yes, we can
Wonderful.
see.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be speaking with you all this morning. Front of package labeling is something that I think about a lot, and I think it's one of the most important public health tools we have to intervene on the food supply and healthy diets across the world. And so I certainly applaud India for taking steps towards creating a front of package labeling system that would help consumers. I am coming from the US, and we are nowhere near you all in terms of thinking about these kinds of actions to be able to promote health. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what we know about these different systems, particularly about health star ratings, as well as an alternate labeling system. So just in terms of the team, this work was done in very close conjunction with Dr. S.K. Singh at the International Institute for Population Sciences, as well as a number of other co-authors, and really, thinking about the kind of global evidence about different labeling systems and what that looks like in the context of India, because of course not every labeling system will work necessarily the same in every country, as well as doing some primary data collection ourselves. So that was our team. I won't go through this in much detail because we've already kind of covered it, but clearly, there is this need to try to prevent further increases in ultra-processed food intake and the associated changes in overweight, obesity, and non-communicable diseases that go alongside this increase in ultra-processed food intake. In particular, we're concerned about ultra-processed foods that are high in added sugars, sodiums, saturated fats, and refined carbohydrates. There is a very large body of evidence now that's accumulated both from large cohort studies to controlled feeding trials that really shows that these packaged foods that are ultra processed are problematic for health across a wide array of health outcomes. So what we're looking to do from a public health perspective is to reduce the intake or prevent increases in the intake of these most unhealthy foods. And that's a point that I'm going to be making a lot. Okay, so in terms of labeling, what are the options? We can really think of these as being on a scale from the most simple, the binary systems at the top, where we have a positive check or a warning label, down to the guideline daily amounts at the bottom, which is, the most complex system that is poorly understood, but happens to be the one that the food industry tends to promote the most. Today, clearly, we're here to talk primarily about health star ratings, which is a form of label that I would call summary guidance. So the idea behind a health star rating is that there are many nutrients in a single food, and instead of providing information about a single one of these nutrients, it's combining all of these nutrients together to come up with a summary score, which is then translated into these stars. I'm glad to see our European friends are here too, because the Nutri-Score label, which is right next to the health star rating, is very similar. It doesn't use stars, it uses color codes and grades, but the basic premise is the same, that we can somehow have an algorithm that uses healthy ingredients to add positive value and negative ingredients or negative nutrients to subtract value and come up with a summary score. And this is a different goal than what you get with one of these binary systems, in particular warning labels, that are really meant to provide a binary piece of information. So instead of trying to summarize a lot of information, it's really saying yes or no on a specific nutrient of concern. Okay, so starting out with health star warnings, and a lot of the information I'm going to share with you today comes from a fact sheet that we've published and I think sent around to quite a few people, but also a global scholars letter that we drafted comprised of researchers in the nutrition field from all across the globe. And so I guess the first question will be, what real world evidence do we have that the health star rating system actually works? George already kind of alluded to this, but the answer is none. Even after almost a decade after implementation in Australia and New Zealand, there is still no evidence that the health star rating, or HSR, has a significant impact on the nutritional quality of people's food and beverage purchases. So I feel like if I can make one single point, this is probably the point to make. This is not a system that is well demonstrated to have a positive effect at the population level. There's small evidence to show that it leads to some reformulation, but no evidence about whether this actually really helps consumers understand what's in their food, helps them avoid unhealthy foods, or change their purchasing behaviors. Another key argument is that the health star rating misrepresents nutrition science. So the key premise of something like the health star rating is that you could start out with a bar of chocolate and then add fruit and nuts, and that somehow this is healthy. But we know that this is not the case. This isn't how our body metabolizes nutrients. We can't take something that's high in sugar and then add some nuts to it and suddenly say that that is now, a healthier product. And so that's one of probably the other key main arguments about HSR. There's really no evidence that this type of algorithm makes sense, that adding these ingredients will lessen the negative impact of the high sugar, high saturated fat, high sodium on the body. The other problem with this type of system is that the HSR exists on only packaged products. So it has this kind of unintended consequence that the products that are carrying the HSR, which are only packaged products, they have these positive stars, which implies that those products are healthier than things like our apple here, whole fruits, which will not carry the stars, despite a vast body of scientific evidence that tells us that consuming whole fruit like an apple is much better than consuming a packaged product like a fruit and nut bar. So another really important point is that the HSR may actually confuse consumers for the same reason that I just mentioned. So the HSR is going to appear on packaged foods, and we know that a lot of the foods that carry the HSR are ultra processed foods, which are just the type of foods that I said earlier we're really trying to limit. There's a rapidly growing body of literature that shows that these ultra processed foods are really problematic for calorie intake, weight gain, and non-communicable disease risk. And we know from a recent study that the HSR label is being displayed on a substantial proportion of newly released ultra processed foods. So, again, the same issue is this kind of implying to consumers that these foods are healthier when they really may not be. A related effect is that the health star rating system can lead to a health halo effect. In the health star rating system, the half star product does not come with a warning. So if you think about the most unhealthy products, I think one of the discussion points that's come up in India is that, well, we could do this as a mandatory system, right? So we'd avoid some of the issues we've seen in Australia and New Zealand, where it's voluntary and companies only put it on the healthier products by making it mandatory, and we'd put stars on everything. I think even if you do that, the chief challenge is that even your unhealthy products, your Coca-Colas, for example, your chocolate bars, would still carry half of a star, implying that there's some positive value to the product when in fact it carries zero nutritional benefit to consumers and is part of a larger category of, in this case, sugary soda, which is really problematic for health. So that means that there would be many Indian products, sugary drinks, salty chips, biscuits, many others that are carrying stars and are thus encouraged. So the health star rating system is in direct opposition to the Indian dietary guidelines, which recommend discouraging consumption of these foods and drinks high in sugar, salt, and saturated fat. Let's see. Yeah. I think another really key point to make is that the chief underlying health goal of the health star rating system is to shift consumers from lower to higher stars. So shifting a consumer from, by half of a star from a 3.0 star product to a 3.5 star product is not the same as discouraging consumption of a truly unhealthy 0.5-star product. So while the numeric set of stars can help individuals rank products, there's no data to suggest that this ability to rank products is A, how consumers actually evaluate products in the real marketplace, and B, that this ranking will help them make healthier choices. So I should have, I don't know why I animated it this way, but basically, you know, you can see here these products. This is actually I pulled this yesterday from Australia's homepage about health star ratings. And these are, you know, all cereal bars. And you can see that they range from 2 stars to 5 stars. So the idea here is that you would know that this 5-star is better than this 2-star. But I think that one of the main challenges here is that this is basically a chocolate bar over here, and it still has 2 stars. So are folks going to interpret this as healthy? It's a positive signal. You should eat this chocolate muesli bar instead of going for the plain, you know, plain muesli or something unprocessed. Okay, so you know, what else could we do? I feel like I would be remiss in pointing out the system that is actually evidence-based and is really in contrast to the health star rating system, which really is a front of package warning label system. This type of policy has been very effective for a number of products that we've wanted to limit from a public health perspective: tobacco, alcohol, and it really aligns with this need to be able to identify and reduce intake of unhealthy products. And so the basic premise here is that this warning acts as a really simple message to consumers, unlike a star rating system where you still have to interpret it and figure out, okay, 2 stars, is that good? Is that bad? What does that actually tell me to do? A warning label system is very directive and it's guiding consumers. This is a product that, you know, it's a warning. This is high in a nutrient of concern. You should stop and think before you buy it. In contrast to the health star rating system, warnings are in alignment with these health goals. So I, at the bottom here, show pictures of what this warning label system looks like in Chile, where you can see there's additional warnings for different nutrient types. But it's, you know, the goal is to inform consumers, let them identify quickly, cut through all the noise on the package and quickly identify what's unhealthy, as well as reducing the consumption of the most unhealthy foods. So this is basically how they work, but the main premise is that they're really attention grabbing and they're simple. And this leads to changes in being able to identify unhealthy foods. It can lead to increases in risk perception. We find that warning labels tend to work best in product categories where people don't know that they're unhealthy. And so that can be quite a lot of foods. And then this leads to behavioral changes. Globally speaking, warning labels are certainly where we see the most momentum, at least outside of Europe. In terms of since 2016, I think we've got it's at least 8 countries that have implemented these warning label systems on foods that are packaged and that are high in these nutrients of concern. The vast majority of these tend to be ultra-processed foods. So this system really is targeting a specific set of products rather than trying to make a health claim about all products. So I just want to talk a little bit very briefly about the main evidence that we have from warnings. So there's tons of experimental evidence that show that warnings are really effective for identifying unhealthy foods and reducing their purchases. But Chile was the first country to implement this system. And we've seen we launched a massive investigation over 7 years now, and we've seen really remarkable changes. So very sizable drops in the content of these nutrients of concern in the food supply. I think even more importantly, and I repeat, we've never seen this for HSR. We have no similar evidence for HSR. In contrast, for warning labels, we've seen almost a 25% drop compared to what we would have expected if the policy hadn't happened for sugary drinks and unhealthy food. So that's a really, you know, important change in behavior, which is as larger than virtually any of the other policies that we've implemented or that I've been involved in evaluating in any part of the globe. So, you know, Chile also did this marketing law, which is really important, but I won't talk about today. But it also led to important changes in consumer awareness. I know one of the key goals is to help consumers know what's inside their food. And in a focus group we did of low-income moms, they told us that these warning labels were really helpful, that their kids could even understand what they were, that their kids would go to the grocery store, and even those that were young would be able to clearly identify the warnings on the package and know what they meant. They weren't healthy and we shouldn't buy them. And lastly, and I think this is another really important point to make, in my experience working on labeling, design, and evaluation, the food industry often will critique labeling proposals because they'll say that it will kill the industry, that there'll be massive economic harm and wage loss and unemployment. And we've seen absolutely none of that in Chile. And I will say this is true for, most of the policies that I've been involved in evaluating. There was no impact on wages and employment. And if anything, this is anecdotal, but from newspaper clippings and discussions with our economists in Chile, it's really a stimulated new business because people are designing new products to healthy snacks, for example, to try to target this new market for healthy food. So I also want to briefly comment on, we did a study, we have all this global evidence about warning labels, but obviously it was really important to us to also, sorry, I'm getting a lot of noise. Can we mute everybody? There we go, perfect. Okay, so, we've seen all this evidence in other countries, but of course it's really important as well to evaluate these labels in the Indian context. What would actually work well for this population? Especially because you have such a diverse population, geographically large, different food intake in different states. So understanding how this works in a large sample is really important. So we recently completed an in-person field experiment. This should say urban and rural, peri-rural areas of 6 states in India. We had over 2,000 adults, and we randomized participants to one of 5 study arms, and I'll show them on the next slide, but we included the health star rating and the warning label. And the idea here was to show people pictures of products with these labels on them, and then evaluate their ability to identify whether a product was high in sugar, sodium, or saturated fat, as well as their intentions to purchase these products, as well as a whole bunch of other outcomes. So here you can see what this looked like. This was modeled off of a biscuit on the Indian market. We looked at popular products and then made kind of similar mock products. Here's what the warning looks like, and here's what the health star rating looks like. You can actually already see the difference here because this is the same product with the same nutritional profile. It's high in saturated fat and high in sugar. And here with the warning label, we have a warning message. But here, this product has 2.5 stars. And again, it's not clear if that's a good thing or a bad thing. This could be interpreted perhaps as being actually healthy. A quick glimpse of socio-demographics is to show you that we, really attempted to get a fairly diverse sample across these states. We had about 50-50 man versus woman. We tried to get about half of the population with an education of less than 12 years. And then again, half the sample was in urban areas, but then we also went to semi-urban and peri-rural areas. I won't show these results today, but we also were interested in trying to understand if there were differences by some of these different socio-demographics. Okay, so what were the main results? The kind of take-home result is that the percent of participants who correctly identified that products were high in nutrients of concern was highest in the warning group. So comparing our trial arms to the control, we see the biggest effect in the warning group, and we see the smallest effect in the health star rating. So this is really important. The health star rating did improve people's ability compared to the control label, but only by about 6%, where we saw much bigger differences in our other labeling arms, and particularly for the warning label. And then the next thing we looked at is, well, how did people, what did they say about their their desire to buy these products when they have the label on them. This is a really important outcome because it's closely tied to actual behavioral change. And in this part of the trial, only the warning label was effective in reducing people's intentions to purchase these products. I won't go through all these results, but essentially we looked at all of these secondary outcomes. And again, the pattern of results suggested that warning labels were most effective. Particularly, I actually don't think I included this, but on perceived message effectiveness, which we've seen repeatedly in tobacco trials is very predictive of behavior, warnings perform best on that outcome as well. Okay, so from our trial, we really saw that, warnings were clearly the best of the label options that we tested. They were the one to show the largest impact and ability to identify products, unhealthy products, and the only label to change purchasing intentions. In contrast, health star ratings were the lowest performing label relative to the control in our experiment. So, in the context of the global evidence, this result really makes sense and is consistent. I also want to acknowledge that there was another India-based research study that came out recently on this topic by the Indian Institute of Management. And they also had a primary outcome that intentions to not purchase products high in nutrients of concern. And the result they found in their paper was, again, that warning labels performed best on this outcome. As the scientists reading their paper, they also included many other outcomes, which, I won't spend time talking about it, but I don't think they're so closely linked to behavior and not necessarily valid for informing the debate. But for this primary outcome that they stated in their paper, they again found this consistent result that warning labels outperform the health star rating. So in conclusion, the health star rating, there's some evidence to show that it's useful for helping consumers rank products or nudge them towards a slightly healthier product when they're looking at a series of different products, but that's not really the health goal. Our goal is not to nudge people from a cracker that's moderately unhealthy to one that's slightly less unhealthy. Our goal is really to discourage purchases of the most unhealthy ultra-processed packaged foods. We can also see that the health star rating can misrepresent the healthfulness of food products. It's unlikely to achieve health goals. And I think the final point is that it's just not evidence-based. There's really no evidence to suggest that the health star rating will significantly impact the nutritional quality of what consumers purchase, nor will it help Indian consumers be able to identify unhealthy products in the marketplace. So I will stop there, and thanks. Here's my contact information. I'm happy to chat afterwards if anyone's interested.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lindsay, for that wonderful presentation. I wish the CEO and the officials from our food regulator should have been really in this webinar. So the message was very clear to you. If I can sum up your presentation, you made very clear statements. Even after 8 years of implementation in Australia, no significant impact on the nutritional quality of people's food and beverage purchases in Australia. And you also had mentioned HSR may confuse consumers. HSR promotes ultra-processed food products. And also you have clearly mentioned the purpose of the warning labels. It clearly informed the consumers and it helped in reducing consumption of the unhealthy product. And there's a message to the businesses as well. No economic impact, no cut in wages and employment in the countries where the warning labels are introduced. You also had presented about very quickly the findings of the randomized field experiment in India. About 60.8% of the people in the warning label can identify the unhealthy product. And you also have touched upon the IIM Ahmedabad study. And you will be surprised to know that based on this single study, our food regulator is going ahead in introducing HSR. And there are several gaps in their study itself, because in one of the section, they say HSR label does not help detect the presence of excess and unwanted nutrient. It clearly says their own study, but still, our regulator is going ahead with the idea of HSR based on this single study. I will stop here. There are three people to respond to your presentation. First, I invite Advocate Saroja Sundaram to briefly respond to this presentation made by Dr. Lindsay, and also pose your questions if you have any specific questions to Dr. Lindsay, to ask those questions as well. Now I invite Advocate Saroja Sundaram. Over to you, Saroja.
Yeah, thank you, George. That was a fantastic presentation by Dr. Lindsay. I think it re-emphasizes our demands that we have been placing before the FSSA over the last few months, actually. So, very detailed and very nicely presented, actually, like clearly defining how HSR is not suited for any country, and especially when it comes to India. There are several factors, as we discussed earlier. We have been discussing how star rating does not go well with the Indian population, and it's difficult for them to even comprehend a star rating to begin with, and also how star rating doesn't actually convey will not be able to support in achieving the goal of this FoPL in the first place, actually, what we aim to achieve. So it will not solve the purpose. I think it was well presented. Thank you very much for bringing Professor Lindsay here today. And thank you, ma'am, for that wonderful presentation. So I was wondering about that study that was presented about the Indian scenario. Just wanted to have more details about the study and the sampling size and all those details. A little more of that, if you could share.
Sure. Yes, I'm happy to share. And actually, we have just posted the paper online to make it publicly available while it's under peer review. So I will get that link and put it in the chat so that you can see everything. But kind of briefly, I'm pulling up the paper right now. So basically, this was a really large study. Actually, it was 2,800 people, and we sampled them in, let's see, I'm looking closely at the method. So basically, we went to Assam, Delhi, Gujarat, Odisha, Karnataka, and Uttar Pradesh in January to March of this year. The study was quite a trial to get into the field, because of course we started to try to do this a year ago, and then Delta happened, and then of course this was during the Omicron wave, but all of the data collection occurred outside. And the research team basically intercepted people coming out of different store types, and then they would show them all of these products with these images and ask for their perception of the products and the label reactions, which is a method that we've used, gosh, in probably half a dozen countries now, because it, in an ideal world, we would do this kind of study in an actual store with all sorts of products available for people to see, but given limited time and energy for everybody, we do it this way, and it tends to give pretty consistent results. So in the studies where we've done something like this more like image-based method, compared to the studies where we actually look at real food purchases, they're quite similar, and they tend to give a very similar pattern of results. So we think that this is a strong method for understanding, well, how would the consumer behave if we were actually inside the supermarket? So that's, a little bit more about what we did. Did you have any specific questions?
Saroja, have any more questions? Yeah.
No, I'm just coming. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lindsay. Thank you for that. And no, George, you may go ahead. Thank you.
If time permits, we will come back in the second round. Thanks, Saroja, for your
Thank you.
response and for raising the question. Now I invite Ashim Sanyal for your response and also raise any questions. Over to you, Ashim.
Thank you, George. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you, Dr. Lindsay, for a great presentation. I think it made once again very clear that our regulatory authority is on the wrong foot, and we are basically headed towards a major disaster by adopting a HSR. My role in FoPL goes back to over 1.5 years. During my first interaction with Dr. Barry Hopkins and Lindsay, you were also there, part of that particular study that we are talking about. And basically, the knowledge gained at that given point of time is no different from the knowledge that we have gained now. That warning labels supersedes all other labeling patterns, in fact, in terms of consumer understanding. And I think the entire exercise of FoPL is basically to make consumer a stakeholder, a participant in the purchasing order. In fact, right now it's the regulator and the industry who are playing, who are doing the batting and the bowling in a cricket match, in fact, and the consumer is nowhere, just a spectator. To bring in the consumer perspective, I think it's very important for us to understand that first is the consumer should understand what's being stated. And that's the most difficult part, because consumer awareness on these subjects are very low, especially in a multilingual, multi-demographic country like India, as you yourself mentioned and seen during the study. It's very difficult for the consumer to perceive what has been effectively told. And I think the warning labels clearly convey that message within the 8 to 10 seconds that the consumer gives to identify a particular food, as whether it's good, bad, unhealthy, whatever way the consumer wants to look at it. The second important factor is the consumer basically believes that the so-called stars are always good. After all, why are stars given? I mean, stars are always for good things, in fact. So even if a product has 1 star, forget about 2.5 and 3, which will make the consumer really deep thinking consumers think about what it means. Even a 1 star carry a deep meaning as far as consumers are concerned. And what we are trying to convey here through HSR is basically something that is beyond the understanding of a common consumer. That is, you bring out a calculator, you basically check the back-end nutrient profile. That's exactly what we are trying to avoid through this particular system. You calculate whether this particular food is good for you, whether you're diabetic, obese, or whatever it is, and you make a choice of decision, which is next to impossible to achieve in the context of India. And the third important factor is that the regulator has brought in a particular law. In India, that plays a very, very important role. I'm quite sure it does in other countries also. And if a regulator is suggesting even a wrong system, the consumer will lap it up blindly, saying, you know, it is a star label, so it's going to be, it has to be good, in fact. So whether it's 1 star or 5 star, let me buy it. He will not see the health harm. So the basic conveying of the messaging to consumer that we are introducing this particular front of pack labeling for identification of foods that are unhealthy, that are high in salt, sugar, and saturated fats. Now that trans fat is hopefully out of the business, it's a very difficult task for us to convey. After all, why should even a consumer spare a glance at this particular label if he or she doesn't know the purpose? The purpose is to safeguard the interests of the consumers. So as consumer organizations, what are we going to convey to consumers if it is health star? That you choose your stars and choose your luck for your health. And the government has mandated it. Whereas for warning labels, we can straight away go to them and say that, look, you avoid high sugar, high salt, and high saturated fat items, which is something that the consumer may understand more easily. So while depicting a warning label on the label, and while explaining to the consumer the purpose of the entire exercise, I think the only thing that suits India is warning label. As George rightly pointed out, I hope somebody from the food regulatory system was watching this video of you, Lindsay, and probably would have got the message strong and loud that what they're trying to introduce, or rather push forward the or bulldoze through is something that is not going to work in India. And we're going to land up pretty much in the same fiasco as Australia and New Zealand, with no end result in terms of consumption reduction of HSR food. So my summary of input in this particular case is the fight is still on. I personally believe that it's a one-man fight, because I still remember the CEO of FSSI telling us during the argument, I would recommend my son to take a nut-filled chocolate rather than a plain chocolate. My God, that coming from a CEO is really surprising and shocking. And I'm saying in the open forum that, I mean, obviously the CEO is not bothered whether that is containing high sugar or high saturated fat. So the basic purpose, if it is not clear at the top line, obviously will end up in mishaps like this in terms of, blind arguments towards HSR based on one particular study, where we believe personally that the study methodology or basically the outcome is biased, is based on certain perceptions being given to the IM group to come out with a verdict approving of a particular labeling system. I think that is something that is quite evident from the outcome rather than the IIPS study or the All India Medical Sciences study, which clearly point out all the way win for warning label. And in conclusion, I must say that there are points to contradict even in the IM label, as you rightly said. In fact, obviously, there were warning labels had parallel good run in all the markings. But then the conclusion is quite different from the so-called outcome of the survey, which itself is a big question mark. I'm quite sure PIL will soon land in the courts, basically challenge that particular study. I have no particular questions to Dr. Lindsay for this particular thing, in fact, but I think it's important for us to carry forward this message even more strongly. George, Saroja, and Amit, all four of us are basically in the committee. So we have to carry back, in case the committee does meet sometime, we have to carry it back strongly to the authority. It is not acceptable from India's point of view. Thank you so much. Thank you, George.
Thanks, Hashim, for that response and also sharing your thoughts, being a person involved in this process for the last few years. It was wonderful, your response summarizing why India should go ahead with the warning label and a message to the regulator. Dr. Lindsay, you have any response to what Hashim had mentioned?
Oh, well, I agree with all of your points. And I think the key is that the health star rating is just not easily interpretable. We know people need to be able to interpret this really, really quickly because there's so much other marketing that happens on the package. And then if parents are shopping with young children, they're making a lot of noise. And so again, I like what you just said, understanding what the 2.5 star means or the 3-star, that's really hard to understand. Now, I know that sometimes the question has come up with the warning labels. Well, people may not understand what sodium is, or they may not understand what saturated fat is. But we actually find that even in populations that don't have a high level of health literacy, it's okay if they don't have a nutritionist understanding of sodium's impact on the body. The warning labels visually are using a signal that's really clear. So using the icons themselves to show salt, and then using that kind of stop sign, or it doesn't have to be a stop sign, but it can just convey negative meaning, really goes a long way, and people get it without having to know the nuances of nutrition, which is really what we're trying to do, because we know that it's really hard for people to understand nutrition information. And so the warning label relative to the health star is just a lot better at simplifying this for people and providing them with guidance about the meaning. So I completely agree, and I appreciate I enjoy hearing your perspective working on this process.
Thanks, Lindsay. Now I invite Amit Khurana, who is the director at the Center for Science and Environment and looking after the sustainable food system, actively involved in the FoPL process in India for the last several years. Over to you, Amit.
Thank you very much, George. Thank you very much, Lindsay, for a very clear presentation. The message was loud and clear. Um, I can just say the question is who is listening it? George mentioned about. He wishes that people from FSSAI should be there. Maybe they are there, but are they really listening it? Or do they really want to listen it? Or are they allowed to listen it? So there are many questions at that level. My journey to this is about a decade old. I mean, this was about 2013 when we were part of a committee. And at that committee first recommended FoPL. So I would like to share I would like to utilize the 4 or 5 minutes that I have sharing the context and the perspective, because I know the message is so simple. In fact, we all don't really need to say the same thing again and again, because it is so clear. It is so evident. The evidence is also there. The logic is there. If you have a common sense and you have your heart at the right place, you know what is the right answer. So let me just share some perspective here. First of all, junk food, as we call it junk food, and industry wanted to call it HFSS because it was in their interest. It only talks about the limited part of the problem and not the other part of the problem, which is ultra-processed nature. So, but we like to still call it junk food because it is junk food. In fact, it is not even food. It is a factory-made product. So this is highly unbalanced, and this is highly addictive. And then you have a similar thing, which is tobacco, which is highly addictive, both causing NCDs. And then you see the label on the tobaccos, cancer-affected lungs. But here, what we are proposing is stars. And see the farce here, right? So stars versus cancer-affected lungs on two different kind of products, which ultimately are globally known to cause bad health. That's one part of it. So what do we have today? What we have today in India is a nutrition information back of the pack label. We all know very, very carefully crafted strategy to actually not tell people how bad is the food. So it's confusing. It is difficult to see, difficult to understand, needs cognitive skills, need a lot of mathematical skills, ultimately useless. And everybody knows that. And therein comes the role of FoPL. And FoPL globally, we know how it has evolved. And we know that in 2013, as part of the committee, we recommended at that time this traffic light labeling, because at that time it was the best practice. But of course, the global understanding has evolved, and that needs to be recognized. And therefore, the world is now talking about warning labels. And in that context, you go about a regressive model, which is rejected by many countries, which is the health star rating, and hope that it will help the purpose. The answer is clear, no. It will only help the industry. It will not help the consumer. It is a pro-industry move. It is not a pro-consumer or a consumer-friendly move. Now let's see where we are. I mean, we have captured this many times in several of our stories. We have our Down to Earth magazine. This journey is largely, I can say, is more like more of delays and dilutions. One step forward, two step backwards. But I can very categorically say here that this is the lowest point that we have seen. When we are about to see health star rating, imagine the regulator, which has laws related to misleading claims, is actually very strongly promoting something which is designed to mislead. So that's the paradox here. Now, and just to let you know, the 2018 draft that came was actually good on thresholds. It was somewhere okay. In fact, common sense prevailed at that time, because at that time it was traffic light labeling, and what we proposed was much better than traffic light. We talked about only red label. We were very smart at that time. And today, 5 years down the line, what we are actually gone to the rock bottom, and we are thinking it's the solution that we have found. So we really need to introspect the intention here. So if someone asks me what's the problem is the intention. The problem is not about. I have strong faith in the scientific community of this country. I have strong faith in the institutions of this country, and I hope that things will get better. But at this juncture, somehow it's the strong industry that knows that FOP, the warning label, is the best. And because these are the same set of companies who are operating elsewhere in other parts of the world, and they know. The same beverage company knows that in Chile, their production their sales have decreased, and that is why they are so hell-bent to basically push here something which is actually does not lead to the same set of scenario, because it will go for a toss. The entire commerce of those industries go for a toss. But they are doing what they are expected to. The problem is not with the industry. The problem is with the regulator. One would expect that the industry they will do commerce-centric work. But what about the regulator? They have a mandate. And I think the regulator therefore needs to muster up the courage and actually deliver on the mandate which they have been given. And I have no hesitation to say, I have been part of this journey. Where we are today is very much orchestrated through commissioned reports as well as scientific panels. And that's the problem. And therefore, I'm saying, we all know there's a problem of design algorithm with the label. We all know that it's an antithesis to actually say health star on bad food and basically giving a license to glorify the bad food. I mean, why would you do that? So we all know that part. But still, and all that is happening based on a study by one institution. That institution, of course, is good, but this study has, of course, many issues. All of us know about those issues. No point talking about those right now in detail. We also know about the thresholds. We had very good standard thresholds in 2018, and then we had very bad. And ultimately, it's a negotiation happening between, okay, let's slightly have less bad. Okay, the consumer groups are also creating some more problem. Let's have some more, better it some more. But you are still far away from what you proposed in 2018. And you are still far away from what is proposed in other parts of the world. I mean, we are talking about 10 grams versus 22.7 grams of sugar in solid foods per 100 grams. So there still is a lot of difference in thresholds. So all in all, I'm trying to say that FSSAI knows, the scientific committee knows. It knows because the symbol-based label, the success of a symbol-based label, no one knows better than FSSAI itself. We all know in India, the green dot in a green square for vegetarian is the most successful symbol-based logo that has worked. We also know that recently they have included a tick mark for the organic food, which is called Javik food. We also know for fortification they are doing F+. What stops them from doing a true symbol-based model here, which is actually warning label? It's difficult to explain, or actually it's very simple to explain. But that's where we are. But I would just like to say here that the question is about intent. The question is not about not knowing the evidence. And that's where all of us have to raise the pressure and hope that common sense will prevail. Thank you.
Thanks, Amit. Based on your decade-long experience for sharing your thought, you have clearly mentioned the problem is the intention, and even comparing with the 2018 draft, how we had gone down in terms of the threshold or the format, the red color code or things like that. And you clearly mentioned the present move is anti-consumer or not the pro-consumer move. Now I will invite Lindsay for a brief response on what Amit had mentioned. Over to you, Lindsay.
Yeah, just a quick response, and then I have to run. My children are now up, and I can hear them screaming in the background. I'm glad to hear that it sounds like the previous study that was done, the other study that was done, is well understood to be flawed. I think I agree. The interesting thing about it was that the primary outcome that found that warning labels perform best did not match the conclusions of that study. And so it's disappointing to hear that that was taken as the scientific proof, and the only scientific proof to create this new policy. But hopefully, hopefully there can still be additional evidence under consideration. And I just want to say that as somebody, here in the US working on the science behind labeling in a number of different places. I would love to, anytime if you need evidence about something specific, usually one of us will know where to find it. So just offering myself up as a potential source of support if you should find yourself needing a particular piece of evidence in the future as this conversation continues.
Thanks, Lindsay. If time permit, we will just come back later. But before that, I would like to invite Dr. Antonio Picasso from Italy, who is with us. Dr. Antonio is the Director General of Competir Policies for Sustainable Development. And few of his colleagues also are there. They are involved in the campaign for effective FoPL in the EU countries, because EU had already decided for a mandatory FoPL by the last quarter of 2022. But the group is also campaigning against the Nutri-Score. That's the anti-Nutri-Score campaign is there. I am aware that they are also not in favor of the too much simplified FoPL in Europe. But the situation in India is quite different. That is the reason we are demanding for a simplified pictorial warning label in India. Now I invite Dr. Antonio Picasso to share his thought very briefly. Over to you, Dr. Antonio.
Yeah, thank you, George, and good afternoon or good morning, everybody. You talk about simplicity, and Lindsay in her presentation said the same thing. I want to stress just a thing that for this issue, what is more important, science to try to find a solution of this big and complex problem, or simplicity? Transparency or simplicity? These are the two questions I give you all, because in Europe there's a very important debate around not only Nutri-Score, but front of pack labels, and why we are against Nutri-Score, because we are convinced that Nutri-Score has got a good target, but it doesn't have the good approach to try to solve this problem. Simplicity in Europe in particular, and not in India. I know it is different. In Europe, the simplicity for this problem is not enough. We are sure that a scientific method and transparency approach for communication, and the respect of a freedom of choice and economic stability is the base, are the pillars for any nutrition policy. And that's why we are promoting a campaign against the Nutri-Score, also because it was defined in France. It is and in fact, de facto, the owner of Nutri-Score is the French government. And well, as you know, in Europe, this could be in contrast with the European values too. Our campaign is to promote the use of digitalization devices and innovations for define a nutrition education and nutrition policies which respect the consumers, which respect the values of Europe. That's this is our position. I'm sorry, I don't have any slide because I didn't prepare it, and I know I knew your webinar just yesterday, so I just bring you my simple position. Thanks, George.
Yeah, thanks, Antonio. Thanks for sharing your thoughts briefly. We will continue this interaction. So good to know about your group and your campaign in EU, and we hope that we will have more interactions in the coming day. Before I conclude, Dr. Lindsay was having an emergency, so she had just left the webinar. Before we conclude, I would like to ask Sanjay Pandey, who is the National Consultant of the GHAI, Global Health Advocacy Incubator. Sanjay, you have anything to say as a conclusion?
No, thank you so much, George. It was really wonderful to hear Lindsay's presentation and also the commentary by all our friends who are right now involved from the day one itself on that. So issues are very clear. I think if I just sum up, one, we need simplistic warning label instead of the health star rating, which the regulator they are putting forward for that. So that's very clearly consumers and everybody they are in agreement over that. Many webinars, many places, they have really reinforced this argument. The second point is that it has to be mandatory, not volunteer. Volunteer for, as you mentioned, 5-6 years means nothing on that. So it cannot be regulated voluntarily on that way. So the mandatory is a real requirement that. And third, what Ashim was also saying and Amit was also saying, the nutrition profile modeling, because the 10 gram cannot be goes up to 47 gram of this as a threshold limit also. So for either fat or salt or sugar, this needs to be really WHO zero. These things are there on that. And lastly, very clearly, the regulator and the FSSAI should listen to the civil society groups more to protect their health, to protect them from the non-communicable diseases, prevent these things, rather than to really have a kind of bias towards the industry also, which was very visible from the all four of you. You were present in the 7 meetings, what you have mentioned in the last 2 years. Majority of those people were from the industry, 17-18 people, which is just the documentary proof of that. So obviously we need to have a regulator should be neutral, should take a stand for the benefit of the people, and that's all from me to sum up in that way. Just 3 points. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sanjay, for that concluding remarks. I fully endorse what you have mentioned. Not only me, I'm sure all the participants of this webinar will endorse those points. We totally oppose the HSR, which is no way going to help the consumers in identifying the unhealthy ingredients. We totally reject the way the decision making was done in a most undemocratic and non-transparent manner. Sanjay, you have mentioned 17 people. I was looking at the minutes of various meetings. In the 30th June meeting, there was total 35. Out of that, 6 were only from consumer organization or civil society. 29 was from the industry. So the average ratio was 6:1. Such a dominated, there was a power imbalance in these meetings as well. And also we, reiterate our demand for a warning label in India. And also you have mentioned about the thresholds. That is true. In the draft working group threshold, for example, the CANDI, the WHO CRO model was telling 6 grams per 100 gram. That was straight away increased into 50 grams. So we were quite surprised, to see the draft working group report on the thresholds. All of you have highlighted that. So I will stop here and I will invite my colleague Simi TB, who is the policy analyst, to sum up and to propose the vote of thanks. Over to you, Simi.
Thank you, George.
No,
That was
no,
really
नहीं
there is some disturbance.
19 में 9A.
Hello, I request you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, George. That was really an interesting deliberation.
You are muted.
No.
No.
Carry on,
Can you
Simi.
hear? Yeah.
Yeah.
That was really an interesting deliberation on the whole issue. So to sum up, I would like to briefly rush through some of the main points that were put forth by our panelists. George welcomed the participants and gave an overview of the topic and explained to the audience the developments happening from the sides of the regulator regarding FoPL, thereby setting a base for the discussion. Then Dr. Lindsay Taylor gave a detailed presentation touching upon different kinds of label, particularly given the context, she touched upon HSR label and warning label. She pointed out that even after 8 years of implementation of HSR label, there is still no evidence of it creating a significant impact on the nutrition quality of people's food and beverage purchases. In fact, these type of label only promote ultra-processed food products by confusing the consumers. She further added that warning labels, which has a higher global acceptance, help us achieve two most important goals of a labeling system, that is, inform the consumer and reduce the consumption of unhealthy foods. She also highlighted few evidences to prove her stand and even spoke about a field experiment done in India, which we can effectively use while advocating with the regulators to test whether FoPLs helped Indian consumers. And Saroja spoke about how Dr. Lindsay's presentation re-emphasized our campaign. Yes, we completely agree. And HSR does not do well among Indian population, and it will never support in achieving the goal of FoPL. That's what she summed up. Then Ashin pointed out that through HSR, regulators are trying to convey something which is beyond the understanding of a common consumer, conveying a kind of message to consumer that we are introducing FoPL is a very difficult and challenging task, especially for a country like India. And we need to convey it very clear and upfront, which warning label could only do. Then Amit shared his journey with FoPL in India. He also pointed how confusing and useless the back of package labels are and how the focus then shifted to FoPL. He summed up with the belief that regulators would someday muster up the courage and deliver the mandate they are given. Then our friends from France, Antonio, shared with us their ongoing anti-Nutri-Score campaign launched in France. And that's it. I think I have summed up. Then I, on behalf of CUTS, thank each and everyone for taking time and joining with us here once again. My special thanks to Dr. Lindsay Smith for taking out a time for us and delivering a very useful presentation, which we will definitely use for our advocacy work. Thank you, Lindsay. And I also extend a heartfelt gratitude to all our panelists who are also our friends of CUTS forever, and for kindly accepting our invitation and contributing immensely to the topic. It was wonderful listening to you all, and I am certain we have all gained some up-to-date knowledge on the whole issue surrounding FoPL. Thank you all so much. We will keep you posted about the new developments happening in this field. Stay safe and have a great evening.
Thanks, Simi, for that wonderful summing up and for proposing the vote of thanks. Now we will conclude this webinar here. Once again, thanks to the key presenter and all to